you'd never guess by looking at him. That's the thing about Daniel Brooks. He had this easy smile, the kind that made people believe everything was fine. At work, he was the guy who cracked jokes in the break room, always quick with a laugh, always ready with a "don't worry, I've got it." His friends saw him as dependable, strong, the one who never asked for help but was always there when they needed it. But what they didn't see was what happened when he closed the door at night. Because behind that smile, Daniel carried storms. Have you ever met someone who looked okay on the outside, but if you looked a little deeper, you'd see the cracks in the glass? That was him. Nights when he couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling until morning came. Days when he felt like he was walking through quicksand, dragging his body to work, dragging his voice into laughter, dragging his face into that same practiced grin. And the truth? He had become so good at hiding, even he started to forget what real looked like. The hardest part wasn't just the loneliness, it was the silence. The silence of people assuming he was fine. The silence of family who said, "Daniel, you're a man, you'll figure it out." The silence of a society that told him asking for help was weakness. So he wore the mask a little tighter, smiled a little brighter, hoping no one would notice the pain behind his eyes. But let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how much pain can hide behind a smile? How many laughs cover up tears? How many "I'm good" replies are actually a cry for help? Daniel's life looked neat on the outside. A stable job, friends who texted him for drinks on Friday nights, photos on social media that showed him at birthdays and weddings, arm around someone, grin stretched across his face. But those pictures, they were masks too, because when the pictures ended and the party was over, he went home to four walls and silence that screamed louder than any crowd. He told himself this was just life. Everyone struggles, everyone pushes through. But deep down he knew his battles weren't ordinary stress. They were shadows that followed him everywhere. Whispers in his mind telling him he wasn't enough, that no one really cared, that if he disappeared, it wouldn't matter. And the more he listened, the heavier the mask became. You see, Daniel wasn't weak, he wasn't broken, he was human. Just like so many of us, he learned to survive by pretending. Pretending was easier than explaining. Pretending was safer than risking rejection. Pretending made the world comfortable, even if it crushed him inside. But here's the part no one saw. Every morning, when he brushed his teeth, he avoided the mirror, because looking himself in the eye felt unbearable. He didn't want to see the man behind the smile. He didn't want to admit the emptiness, the fear, the exhaustion. Have you ever avoided yourself? Not just mirrors, but avoided your own truth. It's a strange thing, running from the person who knows you best. Daniel was running every day, and people clapped for him. They said, "Man, you're doing so well." They said, "I wish I had your strength." And every compliment felt like a dagger, because it reminded him that nobody actually saw him. They only saw the mask. The more invisible he felt, the more he sank. Until one night, sitting in the dark, phone in hand, something shifted. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that night, there was this day, one that looked normal but wasn't. He'd gone to work, laughed at the usual jokes, completed tasks on autopilot. But when he got home, he didn't turn the lights on. He just sat there in the dark, shoes still on, tie still knotted. Hours passed. The silence pressed harder, the thoughts pressed louder. And when he finally stood up, he felt like he was carrying the weight of the world. In that moment, he thought maybe it would be easier to stop carrying. And here's where I pause, because I know some of you listening right now have felt that same thought. Not maybe today, not maybe yesterday, but sometime. And if that's you, let me remind you of something Daniel didn't believe in that moment. You are not alone. This community exists because no one should carry storms by themselves. But Daniel didn't know that yet. All he knew was the darkness in his apartment, the silence in his chest, the weight on his shoulders. He sat back down and forced a smile into the empty room, like if he practiced it enough, maybe he'd trick himself into believing it. But it didn't work. The smile faded, the mask cracked, and the tears he had buried for years finally slipped through. And that's when something inside him whispered, "This can't be it. This can't be all there is." It was faint, almost drowned by the louder voice telling him to give up. But it was there. A spark, a thread of hope, thin as it was. Still, the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the truth about storms is they don't end in a single night. And Daniel? He was about to face the longest night of his life. But what he didn't know was that before the darkness swallowed him completely, something unexpected was waiting to break through. The night stretched on like it had no end. Daniel sat in the dark, the glow of his phone the only light in the room. The clock ticked, but time didn't feel real anymore. Midnight. 1, 2, 3. It all blended together. Every minute felt heavier than the last, like the air itself was pressing down on him. Have you ever had a night like that? Where no matter how tired you are, your mind just won't stop. The thoughts keep spinning, pulling you deeper and deeper into places you don't want to go. That was Daniel's night. He scrolled through social media, pictures of friends smiling, families on vacations, couples posting anniversaries, and instead of feeling happy for them, he felt smaller, invisible, like the world was moving forward and he was stuck in quicksand. And here's the part people rarely say out loud. It's not just sadness. It's the loneliness that screams in the silence. It's the thought, if I disappeared, how long would it take before anyone noticed? That's the question that sat in Daniel's chest, heavy as stone. On the outside, he was the strong one. On the inside, he was breaking. And nights like this, they were proof. He tried everything he usually did to distract himself. Music, scrolling, even forcing himself to draft a work email he didn't care about. Nothing worked. The thoughts were louder. The silence was sharper. And in that endless night, he began to believe the lie his mind kept whispering. No one would really care if you were gone. But let me pause here, because if you're listening and you've ever heard that same whisper, I want you to know it's a lie. It feels real, it feels convincing, but it is not the truth. Daniel didn't know that yet, but I want you to know it right now. You matter more than you think. Still, in that moment, he couldn't see it. He looked around his apartment, the empty dishes, the unmade bed, the pile of laundry he hadn't touched in weeks. Everything around him seemed to scream failure. You're not doing enough. You're not good enough. You're not enough. He curled up on the couch, phone in hand, and closed his eyes, wishing the world would stop for a while. Just stop. But the world didn't stop. The phone buzzed. It startled him, cutting through the silence. A message. Nothing special, just a simple, "Hey man, haven't heard from you in a while. You good?" 3 words. You good? He stared at the screen. Part of him wanted to type back the usual, "Yeah, I'm fine." But another part, the part that was breaking, wanted to say no. Wanted to say, "I'm not okay. I'm not fine. I don't know how to keep going." But here's the thing about men like Daniel, about people who are used to carrying everything alone. The habit of saying, "I'm fine," is so strong it almost typed itself. He put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. His heart raced. His hands shook. How do you tell the truth when you've been lying with a smile for so long? Finally, he typed 3 letters. "Yeah," and hit send. But something about that moment wouldn't leave him. Because even though he lied, the message still sat there like a crack of light through the darkness. Someone, somewhere, had thought of him. Someone cared enough to ask. And in the endless night, that small reminder was enough to keep him from falling off the edge. But don't get me wrong, that didn't erase the pain. That didn't fix everything. It was still 3:47 a.m. He was still on that couch, exhausted but wired, drowning in his own thoughts. But a seed had been planted. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invisible as he thought. Have you ever had one small moment keep you going? A text, a smile, a word from someone who didn't even know you were breaking? Those moments matter more than we realize. They don't solve the storm, but they give us something to hold on to. As the night dragged on, Daniel thought about that message. "You good?" And he realized no one had asked him that in weeks. People laughed with him. They invited him places. They borrowed his charger and asked him to help moving furniture. But no one asked, "How are you, really?" The thought stung. Not because people were cruel, but because he had hidden himself so well that nobody thought they needed to ask. And that's when the anger hit. Not at his friends, not even at his family, but at himself. For pretending so hard, for smiling so much, for making it look so easy when inside it wasn't. The sun started to rise, soft light spilling into the room. Another day beginning, another mask to put on. But this time, Daniel didn't feel like pretending. Not completely, because something had shifted. The endless night had taught him one thing. If no one could see the truth, maybe it was time he showed it. But how? How do you unmask when you've been hiding for years? How do you admit weakness when everyone thinks you're strong? These questions haunted him as he got ready for work, as he brushed his teeth without looking in the mirror, as he slipped on the smile like a uniform. But deep down, he knew he couldn't keep doing this forever. The endless night had pushed him too close to the edge, and now he stood at a choice. Keep pretending, or risk being seen. And just when he thought he didn't have the courage to take that risk, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't just, "You good?" It was, "Call me when you can." And for the first time in years, Daniel thought about answering honestly. What he didn't know was that this call would be the beginning of a voice that changed everything.
The phone buzzed again. Daniel stared at it like it was some kind of test. "Call me when you can." 6 words. Ordinary, casual, but they felt heavier than anything he had carried in a long time. He picked it up, put it down, walked around the room, picked it up again. Why was this so hard? It was just a phone call. But for him, it felt like stepping off a cliff. Because once he answered, once he opened his mouth, there was a chance someone would hear the truth he had been hiding. And the truth scared him more than the silence. Have you ever been afraid to speak because you didn't know if the words would come out right? That's where Daniel was. He'd lived so long behind the mask, the thought of removing it, even for a moment, made him feel naked, vulnerable, exposed. But then, almost without thinking, he pressed the button and lifted the phone to his ear. "Hey," came the voice on the other end. Calm, steady, familiar. It was Chris, an old friend from college. They hadn't talked in months, maybe even longer, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hey." He expected the usual small talk, sports, work, the casual check-in. But Chris didn't start there. He said something different. He said, "I don't know why, but you've been on my mind. How are you, really?" Those last 2 words hit like a hammer. Really. Daniel froze. He almost gave the automatic answer, "I'm fine, man, just busy." But something in Chris's tone stopped him. It wasn't casual. It wasn't surface level. It was the voice of someone who wasn't just asking out of politeness. He wanted to know. So Daniel hesitated. His throat tightened. His chest felt heavy. And before he could stop himself, he said, "Honestly, I'm not okay." The words hung in the air. They felt strange, almost foreign. He hadn't said them out loud in years. Chris didn't laugh. He didn't change the subject. He didn't say, "Come on, man, you'll be fine." He just said quietly, "Talk to me." And for the first time in a long time, Daniel did. Not everything, not the full story, but enough. He talked about the nights that wouldn't end, the weight he carried, the way he felt invisible, even when surrounded by people. And Chris, he just listened. No interruptions, no fixing, no judging. Just silence, broken only by the occasional, "I hear you." It might not sound like much, but if you've ever been drowning, you know how powerful it is when someone simply holds space for you. That's what Chris did. He gave Daniel a place to put the pain, even if just for a few minutes. When Daniel finished, there was another pause. He braced himself, waiting for the advice, the cliché encouragement, the "hang in there." But instead, Chris said, "I'm glad you told me. I wish I'd known sooner. You don't have to go through this alone." And those words cracked something open. Because loneliness wasn't just about being physically alone, it was about being unseen. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt seen. Have you ever had someone look past your smile and see the storm inside you? It changes everything. That night, the conversation didn't fix all his problems. His anxiety didn't vanish, the shadows didn't disappear, but something shifted. The mask slipped, the silence broke, and for once, he wasn't carrying it all by himself. After the call ended, Daniel sat in his apartment, staring at the phone. He felt lighter, but also scared, because admitting the truth once meant he could never go back to hiding the same way again. And that's the thing about honesty. It's both freeing and terrifying. Freeing because it lifts the weight. Terrifying because it makes you wonder what comes next. Daniel didn't know what came next. All he knew was that one voice had reached him when he needed it most. But here's the part you need to hear. It doesn't always take a grand gesture to save someone. Sometimes it's just a call. Sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it's just 6 words. How are you? Really? Maybe that's something you can give someone today, or maybe it's something you need yourself. For Daniel, that call planted a seed, a reminder that he wasn't invisible, that he wasn't completely alone, and even though the road ahead would be rough, he had taken the first step. He had let someone in. But recovery isn't a straight line. It's not a movie scene where everything turns around in one moment. It's messy, it's exhausting, and sometimes it feels impossible. Daniel would learn that soon enough, because even with Chris checking in, even with that small spark of connection, the storm inside him didn't vanish. There were still days when he woke up and couldn't see the point, still nights when the whispers in his head were louder than any voice outside of it. And that's the thing. Healing doesn't happen in a single conversation. Healing is a fight. And Daniel, well, he was just stepping into the ring. But he didn't know that yet. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he had said the words, "I'm not okay." And someone stayed. That moment mattered. It mattered more than he realized. Because soon, when the darkness tried to pull him back under, he'd remember that one voice, that one person who didn't run, and it would be the reason he kept going. But the question was, could he keep holding on when the weight of the fight only grew heavier?
The thing about healing is, people often picture it like a straight road. You struggle, you open up, you feel better, and then life becomes sunshine again. That's the story we like to believe.
But the truth? Healing is nothing like that. It's not straight, it's not simple, and it's definitely not fast. For Daniel, opening up to Chris was a huge step. Saying, "I'm not okay," felt like breaking through a wall he had been trapped behind for years. For the first time, someone knew the truth. For the first time, he wasn't carrying it all alone. But here's the part no one talks about, the days after. Because once the words are out, once you've been honest, the fight doesn't end. In fact, sometimes it feels even harder. Daniel woke up the morning after that call with a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because he had finally told someone the truth. Fear because now the mask wasn't just cracked, it was broken. And once a mask is broken, you can't wear it the same way again. At work, he still smiled. He still did his job, but in his head, the thoughts didn't quiet down. If anything, they were louder. It was as if his mind wanted to punish him for letting someone in. "Why did you say that? You shouldn't have. You're weak. You've ruined everything." That was the voice he fought with day after day. And maybe you know that voice too, the one that tells you you'll never get better, the one that twists every step forward into another reason to doubt yourself. That's the fight Daniel faced, the fight within. Chris checked in a few times. He'd call, sometimes just to chat about sports, other times to ask, "How are you holding up?" And Daniel appreciated it. He really did. But he also felt embarrassed, like every time Chris reached out, it was proof he couldn't handle his own life. That's what depression does. It turns help into shame. It makes you believe you're a burden for needing what every human being needs: connection. There were days Daniel felt stronger, days when he woke up, made breakfast, and thought, "Maybe I can do this." But there were also days he didn't leave bed. Days when the weight pressed so heavy on his chest, he could barely breathe. And that's something I want you to remember. Healing is not about perfection. It's about persistence. Even on the days you slip back, even on the days you feel like you're drowning, the fact that you're still here, that you're still trying, is proof of strength. But Daniel couldn't see it that way yet. He only saw failure. One night, a few weeks after that first call, he found himself back in the same place, sitting in the dark, scrolling his phone, drowning in silence. It felt like nothing had changed, and the thought that crept in was cruel. "See, that call didn't matter. Nothing will ever matter. You'll always end up here." That's the lie his mind told him. And he almost believed it. He almost gave up again. Almost. But this time something stopped him. Not Chris, not a call, not a message. Something different. A notebook. It had been lying on his desk for months, unopened. A gift from a coworker, back when they were handing out office Secret Santa presents. The kind of thing most people forget about after a week. But that night, Daniel picked it up. He flipped it open. Blank pages, empty lines, waiting for something. He grabbed a pen, sat back down, and without thinking, wrote 3 words. "I'm still here." He stared at the words. Simple. Almost too simple. But they meant something. Because in that moment, when his mind was screaming at him to give up, those words were proof that he hadn't. The next day, he wrote again. Not much, just got out of bed. The day after that, ate breakfast. The day after that, talked to someone. Small wins, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to Daniel they were lifelines. Each word on the page was a reminder that he was still fighting, still showing up, still alive. And here's the thing about small wins. They add up. They create evidence against the lies in your head. They whisper back, "See? You are moving. You are growing. You are surviving." Of course, not every day was a victory. Some days the notebook stayed empty. Some days the pen never touched paper. And on those days, Daniel felt like he was back at square one. But Chris reminded him of something important. Square one still means you're in the fight. Don't confuse setbacks with failure. That's a lesson many of us need to hear. Setbacks are not the end. They're part of the process. Daniel didn't know if he believed it yet, but he kept writing, kept trying, and little by little, the fight within didn't feel so one-sided anymore. The shadows were still there, yes, but now he had weapons: honesty, connection, and his notebook of small wins. Still, the road ahead wasn't easy, because healing isn't just about what you do, it's about what you face. And the hardest thing for Daniel to face wasn't the silence, or the loneliness, or even the nights that wouldn't end. It was himself, the reflection in the mirror he had avoided for years, the truth he had buried under smiles, the pain he had carried alone. And soon, he would have no choice but to face it. Because the fight within doesn't end until you look yourself in the eye and tell the truth.
The notebook started as nothing, just a random gift, a blank stack of pages bound in a cheap cover. But for Daniel, it became something more, something unexpected, something that kept him alive. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't filled with poetic words or long reflections. In fact, the first pages looked almost childish. Short sentences, shaky handwriting, barely a line or two each day. I'm still here. Got out of bed. Ate breakfast. Spoke to Chris. To anyone else, those words might have seemed too small to matter. But to Daniel, they were lifelines. Because when your world feels like it's collapsing, when your mind tells you that nothing you do is enough, writing down even the smallest wins becomes proof that you're still fighting. Have you ever had days where the only victory was getting out of bed? That's what this notebook was for Daniel. A record that reminded him his effort, no matter how small, counted. And that's the thing people forget. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always look like breakthroughs and big speeches. Sometimes it looks like brushing your teeth after 2 days of not moving. Sometimes it looks like making a sandwich instead of skipping another meal. Sometimes it looks like writing down 3 shaky words: I'm still here. The notebook became his anchor. Each page was a step, each line a breath, each scribble a reminder that he hadn't given up yet. But it wasn't easy. There were days he left it blank, days he couldn't bring himself to pick up the pen. And on those days, he felt guilty, like missing one page meant he was failing, like silence on paper meant silence in life. That's when Chris stepped in again. Over the phone one night, Daniel admitted, "Some days I don't even touch it. Feels pointless." He paused before answering. It's not pointless. The fact that you even have a notebook, the fact that you wrote anything in it, that's already progress. And even if a page is blank, you're still here to write the next one. That's what matters. Those words stuck with him. A blank page didn't mean failure. It meant tomorrow was still waiting. So Daniel kept at it. And slowly, the notebook started to change him. At first, he only wrote survival wins. Got out of bed, went to work, ate dinner. But after a while, he noticed something else happening. He began to notice wins he had overlooked before. Laughed at a coworker's joke and meant it. Went for a walk and felt the air on his face. Called my sister and asked how she was doing. They weren't big, but they were different. They weren't just about surviving, they were about living. And here's the powerful part. The more he wrote them down, the more he started to look for them. Each day he searched for something to put in that notebook, and in searching, he noticed things he would have ignored before. Like the neighbor who waved when he walked outside, like the sound of rain on the window that made him feel calm instead of restless, like the small relief of finishing a task at work that he had been avoiding for weeks. The notebook became more than a record. It became a lens, a way to see hope where he had only seen emptiness. Of course, there were setbacks. Days when the winds didn't feel like winds at all. Days when his head still told him, "This is useless, you're just pretending." But then, he'd flip back through the pages, and the proof was right there in his own handwriting. Dozens of little victories, dozens of moments that his depression had tried to erase. And he realized something important. The mind lies, but the pages don't. That's why I want to pause here and speak directly to you. If you're listening to Daniel's story and it feels familiar, if you're carrying battles no one sees, maybe it's time to keep your own notebook of small wins. Don't wait for the big victories. Start with the small ones, because sometimes it's the smallest proof that keeps us going. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this notebook was saving him. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, steadily. It gave him something to hold on to when the nights felt endless. It reminded him that even when he stumbled, even when the pages went blank, he could always begin again. But life has a way of testing you when you start to build hope. Just when Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finding his footing, the ground beneath him shifted again. It started with a phone call from work. A project he had poured himself into for months fell apart. Deadlines collapsed. His boss was frustrated. And Daniel, already carrying so much inside, felt like he had been punched in the gut. The old voices came rushing back. "You see? You'll never get it right. You can't even handle your job. What's the point of trying?" For a moment, he wanted to throw the notebook away, rip out the pages, pretend it had never mattered. But instead, he opened it. His hands shook as he flipped through the words he had written. Dozens of tiny wins stared back at him, proof that even when life knocked him down, he had gotten back up again. Proof that he was still here. He didn't feel strong. He didn't feel like a success. But as he stared at those pages, he realized something important. The mind lies, but the pages don't. And with that thought, he wrote down another line. Survived the hardest day in months. Because even on the days when hope feels fragile, even on the days when everything seems to collapse, survival is still a win. That night, Daniel sat on his bed, notebook in hand, and whispered to himself, "Maybe I can keep going. Maybe I can fight another day." But he also knew this. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. At some point, he would have to face the hardest thing of all, the man in the mirror. And when that moment came, the notebook wouldn't just be proof of survival, it would be proof of who he really was.
Daniel had been avoiding mirrors for years, not because he hated the way he looked, but because he couldn't stand the eyes staring back at him. Mirrors felt like truth tellers, and truth was the last thing he wanted to face. It was easier to brush his teeth without looking up, easier to shave while focusing only on the foam, easier to walk past his reflection in shop windows and pretend he didn't see it. Because if he looked too closely, he might see what he had been running from,
the cracks in the mask, the exhaustion behind the smile. The man who wasn't as strong as everyone believed. But healing has a way of leading us back to the places we're most afraid of. And for Daniel, the notebook of small wins had brought him closer and closer to himself. Every line he wrote, every tiny victory was like a mirror he couldn't escape. And eventually, he had to stop running. One evening, after a long day that had drained him to the bone, he found himself standing in the bathroom. The light was harsh, almost unkind, but he didn't turn it off. He just stood there, gripping the sink, staring at the floor. His heart pounded, his throat felt tight. Slowly, he lifted his head, and for the first time in years, he didn't look away. The man staring back looked tired. His eyes were ringed with sleepless nights, his shoulders heavy from battles no one else could see. But he also looked human, real. Not a mask, not a performance, just Daniel. And that scared him more than anything. Because facing yourself means admitting the pain. It means acknowledging the things you've buried, the parts of you you'd rather ignore. And Daniel's reflection whispered all the things he had avoided. You're hurting. You're lonely. You're scared. He gripped the sink tighter, as if holding on could keep him from breaking. Tears blurred his vision. His chest heaved. For a moment, he wanted to look away again. But something in him said, "Stay." So he did. "Okay," he whispered to his reflection. "You're not okay." The words cracked him open. He had told Chris before, but saying it to himself was different, harder, more intimate. There was no hiding here, no mask, no buffer, just the raw truth. And yet in that moment of honesty, something shifted, because admitting the truth didn't destroy him, it freed him. The tears came, heavy and unrelenting, but he didn't fight them this time. He let them fall. He let himself feel. And as painful as it was also cleansing. Have you ever cried in front of yourself? Not in front of someone else, not hidden in the dark, but staring at your own reflection while the tears fall. It's one of the hardest things you can do, but it's also one of the most powerful, because it forces you to see that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. Daniel wiped his face, but he didn't look away. He whispered again, louder this time, "I'm hurting, but I'm here." And that mattered, more than he realized. From that day, the mirror became part of his healing. Not every day, not perfectly, but some mornings, after brushing his teeth, he would pause. He'd look himself in the eye and say, "One step at a time." Other days, "You made it through yesterday." And sometimes, when the weight felt too heavy, he just whispered, "I'm still here." Simple words, small affirmations, but for a man who had spent years avoiding himself, they were monumental. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were mornings he couldn't bear it, days when the reflection felt like an enemy again, when the whispers of shame drowned out every bit of progress. But even then, he remembered he'd faced the mirror once. He could do it again. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The man in the mirror started to look less like a stranger and more like a survivor. Because that's what he was. Not perfect, not fixed, not healed overnight, but surviving, fighting, living. The notebook helped him track the wins. The mirror helped him believe them. And together, they pulled him further out of the darkness than he ever thought possible. But here's the truth about healing. Just when you think you've reached a turning point, life will test you again. And Daniel's test came sooner than he expected. It was a family gathering. He hadn't been to one in months, always finding excuses, always hiding behind work or exhaustion. But this time, he showed up, smile in place, mask polished, ready to play his role. Only this time, something was different. When his sister hugged him and said, "It's so good to see you," he didn't just brush it off. He felt it. And later that night, when someone asked, "How's life been?" he didn't give the automatic, "Good, busy, you know how it is." He hesitated. He almost told the truth. But the fear came rushing back, the fear of judgment, the fear of being seen. So he laughed it off and changed the subject. Later, standing in the bathroom at his parents' house, he faced the mirror again, and the reflection said, "You almost told them." It wasn't failure, it was progress, because even almost telling the truth was more than he had ever dared before. Healing isn't about perfection, it's about progress, about daring to show up even when it scares you. And Daniel was learning that, slowly, painfully, but surely. And the more he faced himself, the more he realized something he had never believed before. Maybe strength wasn't about pretending to be fine. Maybe strength was about honesty, about saying, "I'm not okay, but I'm trying," about looking yourself in the eye and refusing to look away. That night, back at his apartment, he wrote in his notebook, "Faced the mirror, didn't run." It didn't feel like a big win, but when he flipped back through the pages, he saw how far he had come. From "I'm still here" to "face the mirror," a journey written in small, stubborn victories. And he began to wonder if he could face himself, maybe one day he could face the world too. But the question was, when the moment came to truly choose life again, would he be ready?
There comes a point in every battle where the choice isn't about yesterday or today. It's about tomorrow. That's where Daniel found himself. For months, he had been holding on with shaky hands. The late-night phone calls with Chris, the scribbles in his notebook, the moments in the mirror where he whispered truths he never thought he'd say out loud. All of it kept him moving forward, one fragile step at a time. But healing doesn't just ask you to survive the day. Healing asks you to believe in tomorrow. And that was the part Daniel still struggled with. See, surviving today was something he had learned to do. He could mark a line in his notebook, got out of bed, went for a walk, talked to someone. But believing that tomorrow was worth waking up for, that was harder. Tomorrow still felt uncertain, heavy, almost dangerous. Have you ever felt that? Like tomorrow is this big dark space you're not sure you want to walk into? That's where Daniel was. Until one morning, when something shifted. It was nothing dramatic, no movie scene breakthrough. Just a sunrise. He had stayed up all night again, the thoughts refusing to let him sleep. But instead of hiding from the light like he usually did, he stood by the window. And as the sky turned from black to gray to gold, something inside him cracked open. He whispered, almost without thinking, "Maybe tomorrow isn't my enemy. Maybe tomorrow is my chance." The words felt strange, even silly, but they were different. They weren't about surviving. They were about choosing. And that's when Daniel made a quiet decision. To start choosing tomorrow. Not every day, not perfectly, but intentionally. What did that mean? It meant saying yes to small things he used to say no to. When Chris invited him to grab coffee, he went, not because he felt like it, but because tomorrow deserved a chance. When his sister asked if he wanted to help with her kid's soccer game, he showed up, not because the weight was gone, but because tomorrow needed him there. Every choice was shaky, uncomfortable, even exhausting. But with each yes, he noticed something. Life started meeting him halfway. At coffee with Chris, he laughed. Not the fake laugh he had worn like armor for years, a real laugh, one that surprised him as much as it surprised his friend. At the soccer game, one of his nephews ran up to him, hugged his legs, and shouted, "Uncle Daniel!" like he was the most important person in the world, and for a moment he believed it. These weren't big victories, they weren't proof that everything was suddenly better, but they were moments, and moments build tomorrows. Still, the fight didn't disappear. The nights were still long, the thoughts still circled, the mirror still scared him some days. But now, when the darkness whispered, "Why bother with tomorrow?" Daniel had an answer. He had proof. Pages in his notebook, memories of laughter, the grip of small hands calling him uncle. And slowly, the question in his head began to change. It wasn't, "Why bother with tomorrow?" anymore. It became, "What if tomorrow has something worth staying for?" That's the power of choosing tomorrow. It doesn't erase the pain, it doesn't silence the thoughts, but it plants a seed of hope that tomorrow could hold something you don't want to miss. One night, Daniel sat on his bed with the notebook open, staring at the blank page. He thought about everything he had survived. He thought about the mirror, the calls, the nights that almost broke him. And then he wrote, "Chose tomorrow today." 3 words that felt heavier than all the others. Because this wasn't just survival, this was a declaration. But even as he wrote it, he knew the fight wasn't over. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a choice you make again and again, especially when it feels impossible. And Daniel's next challenge was bigger than anything he had faced before. Because choosing tomorrow for himself was one thing, but soon he would be faced with another choice. Sharing his story, opening up to others, letting the mask fall completely. Not just in front of Chris or the mirror, but in front of the world. And that terrified him, because once you share your story, you can't take it back. Once you say, "I'm struggling," you risk judgment, misunderstanding, rejection. But you also risk connection, healing, community. Daniel didn't know which way it would go. All he knew was that the day was coming. For now, he held on to his small victories. He chose coffee. He chose soccer games. He chose sunrises. He chose to keep breathing, keep writing, keep showing up. And with every choice, tomorrow didn't feel so terrifying. It felt like something he was slowly, cautiously learning to trust. Maybe that's all healing really is. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to keep choosing tomorrow one fragile day at a time. And soon, Daniel would discover that his tomorrow wasn't just his to carry anymore. It was a story meant to be shared.
Daniel never thought his story would matter to anyone else. For most of his life, he believed his struggles were his burden to carry alone. But the truth about pain is this: once you share it, it stops being just yours. It becomes something bigger, something that can reach others, something that can heal. That's what Daniel was about to discover. It started small. One evening, Chris asked him, "Have you ever thought about telling more people what you're going through?" Daniel laughed nervously. No one wants to hear this. Who'd even understand? But Chris shook his head. You'd be surprised. People are hurting, Daniel, just like you were. If you can let them know they're not alone, that might change everything. The words haunted him, not in a bad way, but in the kind of way that sits in your chest and refuses to leave. For days, Daniel thought about it. He thought about the notebook filled with small wins, about the mirror that no longer scared him as much, about the sunrises he chose to see. He thought about the endless nights when he nearly gave up, nights he only survived because someone reached out. And he realized, maybe his story wasn't just his. Maybe it was a bridge for someone else. Have you ever heard a story and thought, that's me, that's my life, that's exactly how I feel? That's what Daniel wanted to give. Not a lecture, not advice, just honesty. So one afternoon, with shaking hands,
he opened his notebook and began to write. Not just small wins, but his story. The nights of silence, the mask he wore, the call that saved him, the mirror he finally faced. He wrote it all, raw and unpolished. And when he finished, he looked at the words and thought, if this helps even one person, it's worth it. And here's where the shift happened. Because up until then, his healing had been about him, his survival, his tomorrow, his wins. But now it became about something more. It became about us. When he finally shared parts of his story, with his family first, then a small support group, something incredible happened. People didn't judge. They didn't turn away. They leaned in. Some even cried, saying, I thought I was the only one. Others whispered, thank you. I needed to hear this. And that's when Daniel realized the thing he had been most ashamed of was the very thing that connected him to others. His cracks weren't weaknesses. They were openings for light to come through. The community around him grew. Not perfect people, not people with all the answers, but people willing to be real. People who knew what it felt like to smile in public and break in private. People who were tired of carrying storms alone. And maybe that's you listening right now. Maybe you've been hiding behind your own smile, carrying your own storms. If that's true, then hear this. Daniel's story isn't just his, it's ours. It's yours. Because behind every smile in this community, there's a fighter, a survivor, someone who chose tomorrow even when it hurt. This is what Behind the Smile is about. Not just stories, but family. Not just videos, but a safe space. A place where loneliness breaks, where silence ends, where we carry each other through the nights that feel endless. And here's the most important part. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to keep pretending. You don't have to keep hiding. Your story matters too. Maybe right now you're in the middle of your fight. Maybe the notebook is still blank, the mirror too heavy to face, tomorrow too frightening to choose. That's okay. Start small. Write one word. Take one step. Breathe one breath. That's enough. And when you're ready, share it. With a friend, with a family member, or even here in this community. Because you'd be surprised how many people need to hear your story too. Daniel didn't heal overnight. He still has hard days. He still battles whispers of doubt. But now he knows he's not alone. And neither are you. So here's my challenge to you. If you've been listening to this story and you felt even one part of it deep inside, don't let it end here. Comment your small win below. Share the thing you're proud of today, no matter how small it seems. Maybe it's, I got out of bed. Maybe it's, I ate breakfast. Maybe it's, I smiled and meant it. Whatever it is, let it out. Because when you share, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping someone else realize they're not alone either. That's how we build this family. One story at a time, one win at a time, one tomorrow at a time. Daniel's journey reminds us of something simple but powerful. Survival is strength. Honesty is strength. Community is strength. And as we close his story, I want to leave you with this question. Will you keep hiding behind the smile? Or will you join us and show the fighter behind it? Because this isn't just Daniel's story anymore. It's ours. And together, we're stronger. So stay with us. Keep listening. Keep sharing. Keep fighting. Because behind every smile here, there's hope. And tomorrow belongs to us.